So, this happens to be National Farmers Market Week. So just for a check-in question to warm us up, what's your favorite part of your local farmers market?
My favorite part is definitely like seeing all the people. I don't know, I feel like COVID just, you didn't see that many people. So when I went to the Red River Market on opening day and there was just tons of people and everyone was in like such a good mood, it was so nice. The weather, it was hot, but still people were nice. I think that was my favorite part. And of course, I love all of the stands, but just seeing happy people makes me happy.
Well said. Yes. How about you, Haley?
I actually have not been to the market yet this year. I'm going to go with Dawn on Saturday to help set up and do it. But we've just been working on CSAs. But normally I've gone. I haven't gone in the last couple of years. But I love the selection here. I mean, there's a little bit of everything. There's honey. There's produce. There's handmade items. That's what I like.
Yeah. How about you, Josh?
You probably saw this coming, but the behind the scenes is my favorite part now. Now that I've started working at the farmers market, it's seeing the Facebook page, seeing all of it from a separate angle rather than just being as a customer, being more like an employee there. You're treated differently.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting.
Great. And gosh, when I lived other places that had bigger farmers markets, I loved just the variety and the ready to eat foods and the live music. And here in Botno, what I love is the community and the people. Because I used to be a vendor, I've become friends with some of the vendors. So I intend to just go for 10 minutes to pick up some veggies, but I end up spending like 2 hours just standing and talking with Todd Kyle or Sarah Knudsen when she's there, just catching up. And when I come to Red River Market, it's a great opportunity to see the various farmers that farm serves and just find out how the summer's going for them. So the community. So I wanted to start out by spending some time reflecting on our farm tour on Wednesday. I feel like it's just been a packed summer. So I didn't realize like we had a whole farm tour between now and our last session. So what are some things that stuck out to you about stable days? What are some new things you learned or new experiences or?
I definitely really liked riding the horse. That was very fun. I hadn't done that in a really long time. But overall, I just really liked how they had so many different aspects of like just so many parts of their work. They could like show children how they could better their lives. Like when I was riding the horse, they were talking about the path that we're on, how we may stray from the path, but our horse always leads us back. And that's us too in life. And then walking through the garden, talking about like the different colors of flowers and just how so many different parts of their work just all led back to like bettering the youth. I just thought that was so amazing.
Cool.
Yeah, I did all that, but I love going there. I go there often now. But yeah, just the atmosphere and that there's full creativity for people. So you just kind of have full freedom for exploring different things. That's what I love best about it.
And do you have kids that are involved in horseback riding, Haley?
I have one son that is just starting to really love horses. So he's not ridden there before, but I've been taking them to go volunteer on Saturdays. Cool. So that's something that he's been helping me out with.
Wonderful.
As for me, it was really nice seeing how unified they were, despite how much they seem to be having to work alone or in small groups. They all seem to be able to work well with one another. It's not Gretchen and one volunteer work really well together. It's Gretchen worked well with everyone, and the volunteers worked well with each other, which was really impressive. Although trying to find the post counter was always hysterical.
Sure.
You knew I had to mention it.
Every time I go to stable days or just to have a conversation with Carol Lester, I always leave inspired. Um, they just, she does a great job. She and her husband Ben do a great job of creating a space where creativity is nurtured and everybody that comes there is nurtured, and then just keeping all those volunteers on staff moving forward in the same direction and everything getting done with, it's like orchestra or like conducting a symphony. You know, they're really excellent at what they do. So um, I, I I take mental notes and I learn from observing them whenever I go. So we have our next tour scheduled, and I hope this is enough notice. I was hoping that they would give us a slightly later date, but the date that worked best for them is August, them being Monocon Farm, is August 18th. Is that enough notice, Haley? Oh, but you have your
I
thing
start on
anyway.
the 14th, so I won't be able to go to that one,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I'll be able to visit that one on my own. I know Dawn and Charlie had said that Charlie really wants to see it, so maybe we can find a time to go there together.
Yeah, absolutely. And they do other tours and field days throughout the summer that they host, and they usually have quite a few people that attend those. So there should be other opportunities. Yeah, I will continue to get the word out to the rest of the group. Natalie will be on vacation. You won't be able to make it. Josh, you and I can talk. I can give you a ride again. And
you might want to check with Dawn, because I know that they did say that they wanted to go, so maybe they would be up for going if with you guys too.
They would be most welcome, and if Gretchen and Carol are able to go, the four of them could probably carpool.
Yep.
So Monocon Farm is a tour that this will be my third year doing this tour, and I can at least tell you a little bit about it. They're a demonstration farm for the Burleigh County Soil Conservation District. And as far as I know, the only soil conservation district that has a demonstration farm like this one, or at the very least, one of this caliber and scope. So they demonstrate soil health and soil conservation techniques ranging from garden size scale to commodity crop production scale. So they have fields that they use to demonstrate cover crops. They have some grazing animals. They have some cattle and sheep that they graze in cover crops and corn. They have a high tunnel. They have a vermicomposting system that they use to create bioinoculants, basically the worm juice. But they use a system where they run the bioinoculants through the corn seeder, so they're able to use the worm juice to fertilize or inoculate like an entire field of corn, which is, I thought, was pretty fascinating to be able to use something small scale to impact a large field. And then they have a pollinator garden too. And we'll get to learn from Jay Furr, who is one of the best soil health educators out there, and actually teaches and speaks about soil health around the world. But even if you can't make it, I gave you the link to their website, and they have a whole bunch of videos. And here, I'll pull that up and show you, and I'll drop it in your homework too. So if you go to education and resources, they have a videos page. So you can see videos from some of their, the Local Treasures was a very recent garden tour that they did. I think that's the one you went to, Josh.
I believe so.
And then they have videos from previous years' events. This compost barrel workshop is one. I want to make one of these barrel compost tumblers. So there's tons of videos here from some really great soil health educators and experts. So lots to learn here. They also have a podcast, and I mean, it's not just videos, there's a podcast and articles and lots of, oh, they have programming for K through third grade too. Great. So I wanted to circle back to our reflection questions from the last 2 weeks. We didn't get a chance to really discuss our reflection question from 2 weeks ago when we talked about food sovereignty and food deserts. So we had talked about, what is a food desert and where are they? These are areas where people have to travel a lot further to access any food, and especially nutritious food. So areas where in an urban area, it's where you have to travel more than a mile to get to a grocery store. I think it's a mile. And in rural areas, I think it's 10 miles. And then there's part of the conversation is also access to nutritious food. So there may be a corner store that's got chips and pop and, food that's high in calories and low in nutritional value, but that doesn't mean you have access to food that will nourish you. So after that discussion, the question was, I asked you to reflect on your own community. Where do you see, what neighborhoods have great food access compared to what neighborhoods don't have, might be considered food deserts? And Haley and Natalie, you're in or near Grand Forks and Fargo respectively. So I will pull up that food desert map again because it showed which census blocks in Fargo and Grand Forks are considered food deserts. Okay, so this is the Food Access Research Atlas from USDA Economic Research Service. So if we zoom in on North Dakota, part of what we were discussing was how a lot of the areas that are considered food deserts in North Dakota are on reservations. And, we read Buffalo Birdwoman's Garden and like the tragedy of these were our first farmers, the Mandan, Hidatsa, Rikara, the Dakota people, the Anishinaabe people. They were growing food on this land for centuries, long before white people came in and stole it from them. And now the areas that they're living in are considered food deserts. Also, so just zooming in. So these are the parts of Grand Forks that it calls food deserts. And then there's a little spot over here in Minnesota too. Any reflections, Haley, on, I don't know, where you see, we also talked about how it's like food apartheid, meaning it's not by accident that the areas where access is poor is where low income and BIPOC people tend to live.
Yeah, I'm trying to zoom in. I'm on my phone, so I can't see it very well. So does it say Polk County is one?
Near Crookston?
Yeah.
Just south of Crookston, yeah. Is there a reservation there or what? Why?
Oh, I don't know. I'm trying to think of where that is. Because Crookston has, they have grocery stores and a farmer's market. So that's kind of surprising to me.
It's
Because I'm in
also,
Fisher.
oh, sorry.
I'm right over in Fisher, and that's where I would say should be a food desert. We really don't have anything over here, but we're 10 miles from Crookston. So that's kind of surprising that that's a food desert right there.
Well, it's not just, it's low income and low access. So
Okay, that would make
also about,
more sense.
yeah.
So yeah,
And this
Crookston,
looks like,
go ahead. Yeah. Crookston in of itself is a bit more low income than like Grand Forks.
okay,
So I could see that.
yeah. In a lot of the rural areas, there might be low income people living in the rural areas, but it's, you know, data is by median income. So if there are higher income people nearby, or if there are, sometimes farmers show up as being higher income just because of the nature of farming, because it brings in, you know, there's a lot of expenses and a lot of income. So that can skew the median income in an area. And then in Grand Forks, well, part of it is the air base. Enlisted men, enlisted people tend to not earn very much. So that would make sense that would be low income. And then I don't know what these regions, I guess.
That looks like it's close to downtown, which would make sense too, but
yeah.
So it doesn't matter. It just, if you're low income, that would qualify as a food desert, even though you might be close to a like food grocery store in the farmer's market.
Well, in our reading a couple of weeks ago, there were some other terms, like it's not just food deserts, there's food swamps, and they had a term called food mirages, where maybe there's a neighborhood that's traditionally low income, but maybe it's recently been gentrified. And so now there's all these like expensive coffee shops and like Whole Foods. So if you're low income, it's pretty hard, you know, it's pretty hard to shop at Whole Foods.
Yeah.
Everything's so expensive. So access, you know, farmers markets also, because of economies of scale, farmers have to price things. We encourage them to price things a little higher because that their input costs need to be recouped. So, you know, there's a lot of discussions about farmers markets being like, we want to be sustainable, but then if our food is inaccessible to a low income person, is that truly sustainable? So that's why we have programs like SNAP at the farmers market, the Double Up Bucks program, where you can get double your SNAP, double value from your SNAP. What about Fargo? And especially because you get to work with the participants at Growing Together, many of whom are new Americans. What do you see in your community, Natalie?
Definitely North Fargo. I know Clara had brought this up before. Around the like college campus, there's really not many grocery stores. There's like restaurants, like I can think of like Spicy Pie and Chipotle, but there's not many like grocery stores that I can think of. And the north side of town is more lower income than the south side of town, definitely. Like I live on the south side of town. I'm just thinking right now, like there are tons of grocery stores, like just like right around each other, right near neighborhoods. So there's like tons of access, but in the north part of town, there really isn't. And I know we have one Growing Together garden in Island Park, and that's a newer one for us. I think a lot of our gardens, we are like trying to fight like food insecurity and food apartheid, because especially at our LSS garden, those people, I'm going to like describe a part of town that you probably don't know, but they live kind of behind the mall, by Barnes and Noble, and there is a grocery store right there, but it's Hornbacher's, and I'm gonna be honest, like some of their things are fairly overpriced. So buying your produce there, that's very expensive. So I think it's amazing that Growing Together just has this mission of like you work in the garden, you get food. Like that's just as simple as it is. And I think a lot of these new Americans really appreciate that because going to Hornbacher's to buy your produce, I mean, it's expensive for my family. So I can't imagine like trying to get nutritional food there for a good price. It's just not really a thing that happens there. And then some of our other gardens, like in South Fargo, I would definitely say there's not like a food desert, but still it's just like, I don't know, it's just a great thing to have overall.
Mhm.
I'm trying to think. And something else that we were talking about was like food apartheid and then land being mainly owned by white people and like farming being run by white individuals. And something that it made me think of was like Growing Together Garden, it's expanding and like having leaders who are new Americans. And I think like one, that's a great way to get more like new Americans involved because if we have a new American leader, they're going to invite their friends and that's great. But like I'm thinking about gardens that we've expanded to, we have more like new American leaders in different areas. And so it's really like giving that land not back necessarily, but like I was talking to some Bhutanese people at LSS and they were telling me how they used to be farmers when they were in like their homeland and then they kind of got kicked out because of religious reasons and like now finally like at Growing Together they can finally come back to those roots. And like one man was telling me a story about how like in North Dakota he just felt so depressed because it's so cold in the winter and he was a farmer, like he loved to farm, so when he found Growing Together he like finally was happy for once. And I just thought that that was one so amazing and like I don't know, it made me kind of tear up. So I think I kind of got off topic there, but I think we're definitely like trying to fight food insecurity and like make sure people have access to nutritious foods and like culturally appropriate foods. A lot of new Americans will bring seeds for us to plant. And so then they have that cultural food that they want. And so I think both aspects, I come from a cool perspective working at the community garden, I feel like.
Yeah.
For you, who owns the land that the farm or the gardens are on? Is it the city or is it individuals?
It kind of depends. Some of our land is owned by churches. A lot of our land is actually owned by different churches, which is interesting to see how the Growing Together like gardens have grown in relation to the churches. We are discussing a possible community garden on city land out in Monocon Farm. But other than that, I think it's churches or like LSS used to, well, before they kind of went away, they would own that land and give it to us. Now we're not really having that garden. We have a garden by the YMCA and an orchard there too, and that's city land. So kind of different things, multiple different ownership.
Okay, yeah, that's the one thing that I've run into just in this little town of Fisher. There's literally no like stores or anything but a ton of vacant land, but the city has none of the property. So it must be all individual, like you said, old farmers. But I can't find out. So thank you for answering that.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to show you this picture, Natalie. So from 2016 to 2018, so 2 years. So Farms also has this Farm Beginnings course where we teach people the business planning aspects of farming. And in 16, 17, and 17, 18, we held the course at Lutheran Social Services offices and had a lot of the new Americans from Growing Together participate. And so this is Jeet. I don't know if you've met him, if he's still with Growing Together. He was one of we had 10 Bhutanese people from Growing Together participating in 2018. And Jeet drew a poster showing us, I think it's a map of their farm back in Bhutan. And they talked about how, they grew cardamom and oranges, and they had livestock that would spend the summers up in the mountains, and then they'd bring them down in the winter. So yeah, it was really a fascinating year. And they knew how to farm already. They didn't need us to teach them how to farm. They needed land. They needed, resources, access, and markets to sell their food. And they wanted to grow things that were culturally appropriate. Absolutely.
That's amazing.
So, and I kind of, the weeks got away from me. I didn't realize you would be done so soon, right? It was probably on your application. I'd been hoping to have you and one of the Growing Together leaders talk about growing together with the rest of the class. But maybe after your vacation, maybe there's one Monday you might be available and we could still set it up and do a presentation.
Sure, yeah.
This fantastic program.
Mm-hmm.
Before we move on, Josh, did you want to share any observations? I know you haven't, Botno is a little different, and without a car, it's harder to get out and observe the whole community and the area. But curious if you had any observations that you wanted to share.
Admittedly, I don't really have too many because I do get out and walk a lot, but at the same time, I'm only in one place and it's not exactly as mobile as using a car or a bike. But I would definitely say that we have enough money here to go do a decent amount of things. We have, or the amount of people at our farmers market has been increasing, so we definitely are able to afford a farmers market pricing, which is not cheap. And we have a super. Go ahead.
We being the people who shop at farmers market.
Yeah. But we
Do
also
you-
have the supermarket, the super Walmart. So we definitely have access to healthier foods. So I would say from that standpoint that we definitely do have some access. It's just I can't tell a lot of the time of whether people are struggling with money or not. I don't ask that, and I'm not the most observant with that, unfortunately.
Sure. So one thing we didn't touch on in this conversation related to access is transportation. So that plays a factor too. If you don't have a car, even so, like students at Dakota College at Botno, getting to the Super Walmart here in Botno, it's probably so it's a mile from DCB to my house. It's probably a mile and a quarter. It wouldn't be 3 miles. It's probably a mile and a quarter from DCB to this Walmart.
1.3.
1.3. Okay, yeah.
I had to look it up because I've had to walk to Walmart. It is a very long walk. Let me put it that way.
So that might be the same, some of the new Americans, even like accessing the gardens. I bet Growing Together thinks about, garden location and access when they're choosing a site.
A lot of our new Americans that I was talking about who live behind Barnes and Noble, they take the bus to LSS, and now that LSS, we're not going to be gardening next year. NOLA is really advocating for a garden that's accessible to them by bus because that's how they get there. So yeah, that's important to think about.
Mhm.
One thing I've noticed in Grand Forks that they did fairly frequent, or not within the last year or two, is they put bikes up around town in all those different areas. Like there's some at the public library, there's some downtown over the farmers market. And those are just so neat because it does cost money still, but you have access for it for the entire day and you can go wherever you want.
Oh, I love those bike shares.
Mm.
Yeah. NDSU or Fargo has those too, and I've used those before when I had a meeting in Fargo and I carpooled with somebody and they dropped me off in Fargo, and then I was like, so now I got to get around town somehow. And so I got all over on those bikes. So we also, I want to make sure we have time for Buffalo Bird Woman's Garden because that was such a cool book. Natalie, I saw you mentioned it in your experience report. Haley and Josh, did you get a chance to read any of Buffalo Bird Woman's Garden?
I had enough time to kind of skim through it and get the idea of it, but I didn't read it.
Well, and I will admit, I read like the first 2 chapters and I haven't had a chance to finish it. So what was the question I get? So thinking about the fact, how does it feel to think about that the Hidatsa people were growing these crops here long before white colonists arrived? And so let's start with that one. Natalie, you had some good thoughts in your experience report.
Yeah, I kind of talked about just how it's kind of cool that we're still growing some of these same crops. It's like we almost have a connection to the people. I don't know. I know it's very different, but it's just cool to think about like so many years later, we're still relying on these crops in the same area. And then I also kind of talked about, I just thought it was very interesting to read this. And of course, I knew because I've taken some like history classes, but I think there's often a stereotype with Indigenous people that they were like uneducated or they were just running around and they didn't know what was going on. They definitely knew this land. Like they were, like you said, they were the first farmers of this land. And just to like read about how they took care of their land, how they sang to their plants and their gardens, like I don't know, that's something I would do. I just loved that. And I think it definitely just combats that stereotype that like the Native Americans were uneducated without the white colonizers. They knew what they were doing and like they knew this land. And so reading that was just super interesting.
I think that we've commercialized so much of just the simple basics of what it takes to grow a continuous supply of food. And I don't know, going back to like the root of it and how they did it, I think is just so awesome. And you can kind of see where we've come from, what we've done.
Yeah. Like I said, I only got through the first 2 chapters, but what struck me was she was talking about how, so this was published in, I think, 1917, and Buffalo Bird Woman, as you could see in the picture, was a fairly old woman already. And she was talking about her grandmother used a digging stick, but she and her mother used iron hoes, and they had been for several generations. So that idea that we think that they were primitive, but there was trade. They were trading all the way up, all the way down to Mexico and beyond, Central America. There were trade routes. They were trading for iron tools and implements, which is probably where they got those iron hoes that they were using. So this digging stick was, even to her, more of a relic or an artifact from history. There's just like, her grandma was like this diehard old-fashioned lady who insisted on still using her digging stick and her buffalo shoulder hoe. You also mentioned, let's see if I can find a picture. You mentioned how we still grow these crops today. And part of that is due to somebody by the name of Oscar H. Will, and probably others. White people, white like anthropologists or botanists, I'm not sure what he was, collected the seeds from the Hidatsas. So have you ever had Great Northern beans?
I haven't, no.
Those are adapted from the beans that the Hidatsa people grew. And then there's also an Arikara yellow bean, which is an open pollinated, like an heirloom type. Let me see if I can. This guy had a seed catalog, and a lot of the varieties were, our seed company adapted from Native American plants. So NorthDakotaStudies.gov, Oscar Will. Let's see if it'll pull up. So he had a nursery which included flowers, vegetable seeds, and farm seeds, and he had a catalog. Here we go. So he sold a variety called Indian sweet corn. So he's basically taking these crops that Buffalo Bird Woman's talking about, taking the seeds. Hopefully he traded for them fairly, and didn't just steal them. They probably don't talk about how he acquired the seeds. And then he selected them, plant breeding, natural selection. And that's how we get varieties like the Great Northern beans that we grow today, or the Arikara yellow. So I will drop that in your homework too. Any other thoughts about Buffalo Bird Woman's garden?
Something else that I found interesting was in chapter 2, she had said how a lot of the work was done by women, and I thought that that was really amazing, just because, I don't know, females are often left out of the farming community sometimes, or just like in general in history, it's always the men who are leading things and not the women, but to see how in these indigenous communities, the women were the leaders of the garden, they took care of the garden. I just thought that that was super interesting.
For sure. And I think the men spent more time hunting and things like that. Here's who is this? I think this is her in the field with a horn rake. So they made rakes out of antlers. A bone hoe. There's recipes in here, sort of recipes. She talks about how they they would parch the sunflower seeds, and they made a dish where they combined a handful of beans and cooked squash slices that they mashed up, bean squash, cornmeal, and toasted sunflower seeds. So I'm tempted to see if I could recreate that. I don't know if it would be any good. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was, we talked about tools over a month ago now. We were seemed like everybody was excited about the stirrup hoe and other types of tools. What do you think of her tools compared to the ones that maybe you're using in your gardens?
Are there any pictures of the tools that you can find?
Oh, I'm sharing the wrong screen. I'm sorry. I've been scrolling through. You've been looking at Oscar Will. Here we go. So, and I tried to shrink it down so you could see the whole thing, but I was unsuccessful. She says they used iron hose, but they also have pictures of, for example, this looks like a sort of a rake or like a timed digging implement.
To be honest, that looks more like a broom than anything to me. Kind of.
Here we have, I think this is a hoe, and it uses the shoulder bone of an ox, they said. Here's the digging stick that she used, and she would use this to like dig up sod and make a garden plot. She also talks about how they would burn ground to soften it and make it good for planting the following year. She talks about how they would take the weed, like they'd pile up the weeds that they pulled out and the leaves and things, and then so they dried out, and then they'd spread that dry tinder matter over the ground so that it would burn better, and that would soften and sweeten the ground, I think she said.
Something else about the tools, she had said like the iron hose were like super heavy, and like I can't even imagine working with a heavy hoe. Like I don't even like hoeing like regularly. I love like the action hose, so I can't imagine like using a heavy hoe and like trying to hoe at weeds, and like it's heavy so you're like struggling to do it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, she looks like she's a pretty sturdy lady, and she looks like she's got strong hands. But I mean, that's a iron or steel knife that she's using there. So that must have been traded.
I couldn't imagine using that little stick to get a whole garden prepared. Oh,
Sometimes seeing these pictures really humbles you and makes you realize just how lucky we have it nowadays.
And I don't know if any of you have ever made it down to, I think it's Stanton, the Knife River Indian villages. There might be one near Mandan too, where you can see reproductions of the earth lodges that they lived in. Or the Heritage Center in Bismarck, I think, has at least pictures or part of one. And then they made these raised racks to dry things. Looks like they're drying something on there. It's her drawing of a field. She also has a description of a small land dispute. Like this is their field, and then like this woman was starting a field over here, and this person was digging a field over here, and somebody accidentally started digging into the area that they'd marked off as their field, and it could have turned into a big thing, but however, when they were shown the mark my father had placed, the two women yielded and accepted payment for any rights they might have. So, you know, they didn't have to pay those women, but those women had put in some work digging up the plot already. So, you know, each party kind of yielded a little bit and they settled it. And she said, it was our Indian rule to keep our fields very sacred. We did not like to quarrel about our garden lands. One's title to a field once set up, no one ever thought of disputing it. For if one were selfish and quarrelsome and tried to seize land belonging to another, we thought some evil would come upon him, as that someone of his family would die. There is a story of a black bear who got into a pit that was not his own and had his mind taken away from him for doing so. Land is so valuable here, especially farmland, and can be the source of major disputes, and can sometimes succession planning and land, like the inheritance of land, can tear farm families apart. And it's just fascinating to read how they were able to navigate that, using in their traditional cultural ways, and just maintain peace and goodwill.
I like that they let the land teach them, like that they learned from it and they respected it like that as almost like a relationship. which I feel like we've lost a lot of.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that I love most about farms and the farmers that we work with. If it came out most in our Farm Dreams course that we have every fall. Just that people who practice sustainable agriculture tend to do so because they care deeply about the land that they're working with, and they want to have a relationship with the land in a sense of place. It's not just an income. They're, it's about far more than money and power and wealth. And that's really neat to see.
In the book, she had talked about how she everyone treats their garden like it's a child of theirs, and they like protect it and care for it. And it made me think of like, if you've ever seen like this study where they have two different containers of cooked rice, and to one of the cooked rice, they're like really nice to it, and to the other one, they're like mean to it and say like mean words to it. And like the cooked rice that was talked to nicely just did so much better. And I do that with my plants too. I talk to my plants, which some people might think is weird, but I think when you tell your plants like positive affirmations, they're just going to do better, just like the rice that was in the container that was like told, like talked to nicely. So I think when we like talk to our plants or care for our plants like they're children, I just think they're going to like do so much better. And so it was interesting to read how she like sang to her plants, talked to her plants. I just loved that.
That sounds like a fascinating study, and I would love to, but can you elaborate a little more on the cooked rice bit? Like,
yeah, it's just like it was just two containers of like rice that they had cooked, and then they put them in the fridge, like same like situation, same environment, but to like one of the cooked rice, they like were like, "Oh, you're so beautiful, like you look amazing, you smell amazing." Then to the other like container of cooked rice, they were like, "Oh, you're so ugly, you're nasty." And the container of like cooked rice that was talked to poorly, like it molded faster.
okay,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I've heard of studies like that with potted plants too, and kind of teaching kids that.
Mm-hmm.
But plants respond to that, and some when you put music to them, and some when you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Because like the mold is a living thing too, but it's like it's a mean it's a mean living thing that thrives on mean words almost. Or maybe just the integrity of the rice was less, so the mold was easier to had a better foothold.
Mm-hmm. It's just
That's
so
fascinating.
So I just feel like positive vibes everywhere just makes things better.
Yeah. Makes makes it, it's like what we learned, it's like what we observed at stable days, just creates an environment where people are happy and want to be there, and then they'll give back, they'll give good vibes back too. That's what I've got for you today. If you have any other comments about Buffalo Birdwoman's Garden, we've got 3 minutes left. As far as homework, you've already got some soil health readings in your portal, and I will find you soil health pre-work for next week. We'll talk about soil health again. Maybe next week we'll talk about the Farming Well Black reading, and some of those. So I'll update the portal with resources for next week. Boy, have a great time in San Francisco, Natalie. We'll miss you.
Oh, thank you. I'll miss you guys too.
So yeah, this is your opportunity for any last comments, and if there are none, I'll close it down.
Have a safe trip, Natalie, and have a nice week, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, hopefully I'll see you guys soon.
Okay. Bye.